Hello, welcome everyone to today's talk. We are all a bunch of creatives and we are all talking today here in this room about understanding the relationship between business and the creative arts. So we're going to kick it off straight away and first of all tell you who we are and what we are doing here. So Neil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon everybody, good to be with you all. Yeah, I'm Neil from Neil Morgan Design. I've worked in the creative sectors for over 30 years. I've got my own graphic design business based in Cheltenham and Gloucestershire in England for the benefit of international audiences. And yeah, I sort of deal with all aspects of design through print to digital, working with organisations of all sizes, dealing mainly with brand and branding to ensure that organisations present themselves in a clear and coherent visual way. And I suppose for the basis of today's discussion, I tend to bridge the gap between business and the arts. A lot of my clients are in the arts and culture sector, so I sit on the fence between both those sort of worlds, so to speak. So that's why I'm here today. So good to be with you.
Amazing. Well, that's going to be very, very interesting with some of the questions that we've got today. So moving on, next on my screen, we've got Matt. Hi, Matt. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Matt Ewalt, and I work for a not-for-profit cultural institution in Western New York in the United States, Chautauqua Institution. And the way in which I guess belong in this conversation is that I'm part of an education team that's looking at the way in which you can approach examining issues from a multidisciplinary and intergenerational way. And since the late 1800s, Chautauqua has convened people from all over the United States and the world and in community, and some for all summer long, some for at least a week in residence, and really through very intentional conversation and exploration, wanting to go after a wide range of issues, but recognizing that the arts and humanities are indeed a really important lens through which to understand our world and to solve problems.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you very much for being here. And next we've got Becky. Hi, Becky. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is Becky Smith. I'm the lead consultant of a marketing consultancy organisation for arts and heritage and cultural organisations. So Flying Geese is the name of our consultancy firm, and we work with organisations to help them understand who their audience is and who their visitors are. And also, so that's half of what we do, and the other half of what we do is we help those arts, cultural and heritage organisations to tell their story in a better, more purposeful way so that businesses or stakeholders or communities or residents or whoever their target groups are can understand exactly what that business does to increase their brand awareness, but not only just to hear about those organisations, but to actually get involved and do something and engage and make a commitment to that organisation as a result of the messaging that they're putting out there.
Amazing, amazing. And hi to George. Hi, George. Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
I'm just checking the major phrase of 2021, you're on mute.
Yeah.
I'm not. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be part of this panel. Looking forward to discussing a lot of these things. I think it's an incredibly interesting and hot topic at the moment. My background is working in the arts and cultural sector for a long time, kind of on both sides of the microphone, having performed a lot as a musician. 6 years ago, I set up On Song, which I suppose we might say solves business problems through music. So we run choirs and singing workshops with organisations around the country, nay, around the world, since we moved all our activities online. We have a network of amazing facilitators with backgrounds predominantly in performance. We look to reframe the kind of slightly stuffy didactic vision of the choir into something which is engaging and something which gives people a musical creative access point. There's a lot of people who think they can't sing, and it can be demonstrated very quickly that they can. And I think that in itself, bringing almost the music itself is almost just seen as a vehicle a way of tapping into something with people, taking people on a journey that can really bring out amazing things, both on an individual level and on an organizational level. So that's us. I'm not going to talk anymore for the introductions, and I'm looking forward to exploring further with you all.
Amazing. Well, it's so lovely to have you here. And next on my screen, I've got Kashaniwa. Hi, how you doing? Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm in London. I don't know where everyone else is, but yes. I work in the cultural and creative industries, African and Caribbean peoples, descent, nations, in the UK and globally. And so this forum has come just at a point where we are working with the creative arts. There are two organizations that I would, I guess, refer to in this forum, which is Nubian Jack Community Trust. We are the largest plaque, the largest diversity plaque and sculpture scheme in the country, and also African Tales, which is more of a global platform. And so there are certain aspects that I think you're all involved in, that we ourselves in terms of how I work sort of applies. Myself, I'm an artist. I've worked in theatre and film, back in the day. So films, I've worked with Richard Attenborough in Cry Freedom, and been in and worked with people like Danny Glover in Mandela and other bits and pieces. And I do an art form that is classical and ancient to Africa in particular, and that perhaps is dying away. So my role is about enabling it to be present in the 21st century. So very happy to be on the forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you here. And finally, last but very much not least, Thomas, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone? You're on mute, Thomas. You're on mute.
Oh dear, terrible. Hello, lovely to meet you, everybody. Thanks, Helena. I'm a composer and music producer, and my music's sort of played around the world. You probably will have heard it on telly or on film at some point. And I sit very much in that space between creativity and business, because I'm a company director myself, and obviously I'm constantly juggling the two. And I think an obsession of mine really is what helps which part. And I think you can't really have creativity without business sense, and I think you can't really have business, brilliant business, without creativity. And so I think a lot about this, and I'm very interested in discussing this today. But that's where I sit really, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else does.
Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have you all here, and I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name's Helena Mitchell. I'm a voiceover artist and actor and comedian and writer based in Cheltenham in the UK, so south of the UK. So yeah, today we are all going to be talking about creativity. So I think the best question to really start us off and kick us off would be, can we teach creativity to a non-creative workforce? Neil, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Gosh, why don't we start with the easy one first?
We're going straight in. We're going straight
well, yeah, quite. Actually, well, I think to a non-creative workforce, I think you're probably doing them a disservice by calling them, I think in any workforce, I think there's people who have creativity. It might sometimes be stymied. It might be sort of suppressed, if you like, by, employers or the business world that they're inhabiting. So I think in every workforce there's creative people. I suppose it's just really a case of giving them a vehicle and a voice to actually sort of express that creativity and to share that. And I suppose a big part of that is actually the organisations they work for, and allowing people to actually sort of have an opinion and have a sort of thought process and to think creatively, whatever that is. So I think you can teach sort of creativity to a non-creative workforce if that is an issue. But I do think a lot of it is based around the company structure allowing that voice to be heard and for different objectives to be explored, and just to really sort of the opportunity to actually think outside the box. I hate this phrase, think outside the box, but I know it's a cliche, but to actually just take a step back and actually explore completely different ways of thinking, which hopefully over the last year or so, people have started to discover and to challenge themselves and actually, sort of be non-conformist for a change, and, be, quite sort of daring in their thought process. So yes, I think you can teach a non-creative workforce, but it sort of really channels down from the top, I think. And, I think companies can stymie and can suppress that if they're not careful. So.
Nice. And are we kind of all on a agreement with that, Matt?
I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes it's about the words we're using, right? Because another word for creativity could be innovation. And it's certainly the case. I think the word innovation has certainly been used a lot over the past year because organizations have felt forced to, and you can, and I don't mean that forced to in terms of not only to survive, but to adapt. And so, but to your point about how do you not only able to tap what I think George Kimball of Stanford D School calls that kind of latent creativity that's in all of us. But part of it is the culture you establish in an organization that makes sure it's not only certain leaders at a certain level that can be the creative or innovative ones, but that indeed everyone in an organization not only has that potential, but those ideas are welcomed and encouraged.
I love that. I love that. So, oh, Becky, yes.
Yeah, I just want to kind of come in on that. I've just written down the word is the innovation department. And it reminds me of this really funny story of 3 or 4 years ago. My sister's partner, every year at Christmas, always, and it's so typical, but it actually happens in our family, always asks for jazzy socks at Christmas. And he's always given the most jazzy socks. It sounds like I'm going off on a tangent, but believe me, I'm not. So he works for I'm not going to name the company that he works for, but he works for one of the big 5 financial firms in England. And he goes to work in what could only be described as a uniform, although he'll tell you that it's a tailored suit, but it's a uniform. And we've always had this bit of a joke about why does he always ask for jazzy socks? And it's because that his feet underneath the table are not seen by everybody else. And so my husband and I, who work in the creative sector, had this joke and say, oh, it's a one chance you're allowed to demonstrate your creativity and your individuality. And he then came back and said, well, you should see the state of our boxes then, because they're louder than our socks, for example. But when we had this conversation, we were talking about creativity, and he then said, oh, but that's not my department. That's for the innovation department. And isn't it, what I think is quite interesting is that people have innovation departments, and yet some of the most creative organizations and creative businesses are those that have agile departments. And so it's not specific departments, but it's based on project-based departments. So you might have whoever on X project, and then whoever on this project. So for example, you might have a finance person, a marketing person, a fundraiser, or whatever role, but to form departments based on the current project, which is happening today. And I think, and then, some of those might cross over or some might not. But I think that it's that agile working and creating project-based departments with, jazzy socks on is where that kind of creativity can come from.
So kind of just going off that slightly, do we kind of feel in general that all businesses, in order to succeed, need a creative sector or need a creative person in their team? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I would answer that all organizations need to have creative people in their team. But if the culture of the business is not one with creativity stemmed through, it can be very intimidating for that creative person to step out of the mold and say, this is my creativity, let me showcase it. Instead, there need to be security in number, and that number then becomes the creative department, who can then start to instill change, and then hopefully everyone will be empowered to feel confident enough to showcase their individual creativity.
Yeah. Thomas.
Can I just jump in? So I've always agreed with the late Ken Robinson's ideals that the education system is what stifles creativity. And I think there's a really kind of fine balance between obviously the education, but also not depressing that inner child, which we've all got, because I think everybody's inherently creative, and I think there is a real danger that it can be, taken out of people. I did a piece of work, this is going to sound like a name drop, with Pixar around the time it was being bought by Disney, and the whole organization is set up like, it's called Pixar University, and everybody goes around on scooters. It's like being at nursery school, and every single person in that organization is creative all day, and it's absolutely fascinating. And the way that they've created this kind of structure where everybody's learning the whole time, it stops any kind of stymieing, any kind of stifling of any ideas, creativity. Everybody's encouraged to push in. And even when you've got something like Toy Story 5 or whatever, with John Lasseter who was running it, everybody is encouraged to talk to the director of the animation and come up with ideas. Even somebody in the creature shop, or somebody just drawing something, or somebody coming in with a few extra motion graphics, they all take part in the creative side of the organization. So I just throw that in because I think that's really important, that everybody, it's like, I agree with the other people in this chat, that it's about creating that creative space that's a safe haven that brings the ideas. And something I'll just talk about later is the fact you've got to, when you're creative all the time, as I am, you've got to create that space where you come up with ideas. You can't create creativity, but you can create the space where it's likely to come, whether that's in the shower or whatever. But it's like, it's creating that safe place, rather than kind of constantly thinking in numbers in business, because you have to switch between the various roles.
So do we feel that, I was just going to say, I think that's probably where hierarchies within organizations, especially large corporates, actually are really damaging, and because it allows, it doesn't allow what, Thomas has just said, that opportunity to have that voice, and to actually just have these wild, way out, sort of left of field ideas that are listened to, and actually some taken on board, sometimes not. But hierarchy sometimes is a really damaging thing.
Yeah, I was referring to what Becky said about the word intimidating. The flip side of people riding around on scooters and imitating toddlers is that in organizations you have those who are creative and those who are not, or those who self-identify as creative or not. And it's not a binary thing, the way we've evolved as humans, you have to be creative. You can't get on in the world without some element of creativity. But if you get labeled as one or the other, if you're labeled as non-creative, then it's intimidating to be around creatives. That's the thing. It's a kind of thing with singing, or a thing with music generally, that people who have not had any musical education feel often very intimidated about engaging on subjects beyond what you like, or do you know the words to X, Y, Z. And I think it's about giving people license and kind of reframing the idea of creativity, be it innovation or be it just thinking in a slightly different way.
Everybody's a non-binary creative.
And I was going to say the freedom to make mistakes too, right? I mean, I think part of that hierarchy is that, yes, those in the innovation department or higher up, because that's their charge, can take those chances. But that's part of creativity, right? It's the taking those chances, stepping out of your comfort zone, and at times failing, but learning from those failures. So I think that's so much part of the culture that needs to be encouraged throughout an organization, because I think many assume, well, that's fine, but I'm not allowed to make mistakes. This is what I have been asked to do, and I need to stay in my lane.
So as creative people, all within businesses, and people that kind of identify ourselves as creatives, that labeling of you're a creative person, you're not a creative person, you're very academic, let's say, or something like that. It's difficult because then creative people feel that they're not academic, and academic people feel they can't let loose and be creative. So these sorts of labels that we're given quite early on, I feel quite early on, sort of 7, 8, 9 years old, we get defined as that. So then we kind of, as you were saying, get the fear and things. So do you feel, and I'm going to come to Thomas first with this one, because I feel that, you've got a really good sort of crossover, particularly with the business and the creative side. How do you feel in terms of moving forward, progressing forward in an ideal world? Do you feel that businesses really need to grasp hold of this now and really make sure that businesses are allowing for creativity to happen and allowing for those spaces to happen, rather than creativity, from my experience, being very much shoved down to the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom of the list, the lowest of the low in terms of authority in a business sector?
It's a great question. I think I agree. I think after the pandemic and after Brexit, all these other issues that's been on the mentioned in the world, I think we've got to all think creatively, and every single organization has to have that impetus. And I reckon even if you have to have the hierarchy, I mean, at the end of the day, you do have to have somebody running the company,
Yes.
or somebody running the company. But I think if there can be a new structure of kind of creative surgeries, maybe, where, you know, whoever's running the company at the top ostensibly, you know, has equal comment from people below them, I think it's really important. I've got a friend who works at Google, and everybody is kind of equally, you know, involved in the new products, and everybody's given, I mean, obviously with a company like that, I was reading yesterday that when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he turned the various profit and loss sheets from the entire, you know, all the different products into the one, and so it became, you know, this huge kind of profit and loss for the one company, and that was what kind of saved Apple. I think if everybody's given a kind of creative part in the wider organization, without kind of demeaning the necessary structures, I think it's really important.
So for people kind of watching this, maybe, you know, with their own businesses and are wanting, maybe don't themselves have experience of creativity as such, or they don't feel that they're particularly in the creative sector themselves, but they want to introduce more of a free space for creativity to happen within their workspace. This kind of opens up to the whole room here. Feel free to chip in, everyone here. But what sort of advice or tips do you think from your own personal experiences are really necessary as a creative within a business?
Okay, so I would like to come in terms of just following up some of the points that were raised, particularly the one about space and environment, and also what is the aim of the business. At the end of the day, the business has got to have an ROI. So somewhere along the line, there is a return on everybody's participation and what they do, because that's quantified, isn't it, in accounts? So, for example, if I take the point of view from sales, I worked for a company that looked at the shopper journey, and their office and where they met clients was a supermarket. Okay, so when the client is in that space, they are surrounded by the body that they are facilitating. So everything was present: dairy, cosmetics, health and beauty, and, you know, and everything else. So they could contextualize that space and how the shopper would take their trolley, and there was a trolley and a basket present, and they could see what they would go to next. So whether cereal was going to be close to where there was going to be dairy, because with, you know, you need milk, or you need soya or almond milk or whatever, needed to be within accessible points. They weren't walking right across the other end of the space. Okay, so that environment was also relevant to the business itself and who was facilitating the clients. The other point that I would raise is that I think we have to understand that creativity isn't just the elements of creative that we have, that is song, that is percussion, that is art, that is poetry, and so on. Creativity is also whole brain thinking, isn't it? So, for example, Coca-Cola back in the day introduced One Brain, introduced Brain Gym, where they were encouraging their salespeople to use things that would turn on their body and use acupressure points, use cross-patterning, so that they were physically and holistically, if you like, ready to engage in what they had to do, whether it was articulation, whether it was about writing the pitch, whether it was about creating for the business a new way of achieving sales. Okay, so that there isn't this thing, oh, I can't draw, I can't sing, I can't do these things, so really there's no space for me. But in fact, they can actually bring a whole new concept in how a product or a service is accessed or reached by the end user. And that is the creative. So working with a process that enables your client, your personnel, to actually turn themselves on to achieve the present time work, wherever they've come from home in the morning, from the train journey or something in. And there are some sessions over the course of a month or a week that they tune into that. and then interact with it again is great. And I suppose things like role play and those other creative aspects then come into play. One of the examples that I will come to in terms of where we are currently, in the terms that Matt was talking about, creativity and music. Now, we are about to release a single tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And this single is called I Have a Song. And it's for the telling of the story of African and Caribbean nurses and midwives that were called to the country, to the UK in 1948 to help create and serve and make happen the NHS, the National Health Service, which again was also launched in 1948. So the nurses and midwives that were the prime movers and shakers of that time have had very little recognition, but it's their policy, their experience on the floor and what they did that has created the power that the NHS is today. Now, what does this song do? This song is an awareness raising of that. So we've taken something creative. It's actually a pop song, you know, it's a song that comes from a film called Prison Break. It was written by a sort of neo soul person in the US, Eric Roberson. And we've taken that, made it our own as a UK. It's, you know, 99p or 79p on Apple, but it allows people to hear from a musical perspective what this experience was, to tune to that experience, to explore that experience, to acknowledge that experience of nurses where they go to a hospital every day and they see the wonderfulness of what is facilitated, but 70 years ago it wasn't quite like that, and these are the people that created it. So the creative, coming back to the actual PowerPoints of that we understand music and everything else, again, what stories do they tell of everyday life for the people in the business and for the clients? So those are the two aspects that I would kind of draw attention to. And one is non-pressured and the other is very directly using the creative means and therefore the open platforms that are acceptable to people in art galleries and concert halls, etc.
And I think that's a really, really good point about the stories, you know, the stories that of the business. And I know that Becky, I'm right in thinking that you're quite keen about businesses really knowing the story of their business in a creative way. Do you want to just expand a little bit on that?
Yes, I think that's right. I think it's, I think the word advocacy is really important at the moment. I think that so very often businesses are rightly sales orientated because, you know, they need to make the sales, they need to get the transactions in and get that return on investment. But I think that there's such a competition in the world, with regardless of what business sector you work in, whether it's arts or finance or whatever, the level of competition is so competitive that people are struggling to be seen as valuable to their stakeholders. And of course, when a business is seen as valuable to their stakeholder, suddenly the stakeholder goes out of their way to then engage with the business. So rather than the business standing there with like the Oliver Twist bowl saying, please, can I have some more from you, my worthy, you know, amazing stakeholder, it's the other way around. And the stakeholder is saying, you're of such value to me, I need to invest in you, whether if you're a non-for-profit, then I need to give you, you know, I need to fund for you, or I need to, you know, use you for my case studies or whatever. And I think that's something that I'm personally working with lots of organisations to do at the moment, especially in the case of arts, culture and heritage, is that so often the creative industries have been seen as that Oliver Twist profile of, you know, the arts are always skin, or we've never got any money, and, you know, we need fundraising all of the time, and, you know, please sir, can we have some more money, you worthy corporate sponsor. And yet it's something that I'm doing time and time again with businesses, with arts organisations. It's completely turning that on its head and saying, well, no, well, hang on a minute. Yes, okay, we don't have the zeros at the end of our bank balance that you do, but we have got a worthy customer base. We've got a very, very high quality product. This is what we represent and this is what we can do. And through us, your state, you know, your business can achieve X, Y, and Z. And so therefore we have got a valuable or we're a valuable vehicle for your stakeholder, for you to move forward. And without, this is our offer. And we've done that time and time again. I mean, specifically with theatres and everything like that, we've completely changed that messaging to say, you know, it's not a case of we're in need. Yes, of course, we would like some more money. However, our database is X strong. This is our product. This is how you can entertain. This is what we can do for you. This is how we can help your CRM strategy. This is how we can help, you know, position you. This is about how, like, looking at a council benefits. This is how we can help make better places, etc. And that, I think, is where organizations need to understand who those stakeholders are, what are the needs of those stakeholders, and how can you channel your messaging to each different stakeholder in a way that presents you with a sense of value. Because if you can get your stakeholders to believe in your sense of value, they will then come to you rather than the other way around. And that, I think, is a real opportunity for many creative businesses.
Yeah. Neil, did you want to?
Yeah, I'd echo that, Becky, because I recently attended a seminar on corporate and social responsibility, and the crux of the message was that actually by having a story, telling your personal story, whether it be through an organization, what you're doing, whatever, it gives you that ability to create links with people who are interested in your story, who have a mutual benefit, or, you know, can create mutual benefits. And there's some great examples of organizations you would never ever consider, you know, think of being married up together. You know, you could perceive they were completely polar opposites, but by explaining their story and actually created really strong links, mainly through the arts and the arts sector and sort of cultural and heritage sectors, and actually sort of gave that opportunity to really sort of create links and business links and opportunities and networking that perhaps they would never have done, purely by actually communicating their story, as you've just said.
Yeah. I think story is so important. And George, I've got a question for you from a business point of view. Obviously you're coming in and you're like providing, you know, opportunities for people who maybe don't feel that they're creative, or, you know, are saying, oh, I can't sing, I can't do all of this sort of stuff. What is the actual, on a human kind of emotion point of view, what is the effect that, you know, choirs and things like that you're being able to provide for businesses to people who maybe wouldn't have necessarily reached out to that? What effect is it having on them as a human being in terms of their confidence, and then in turn back on the business?
Wow, kind of worms, that one. Yeah, I mean, all sorts. There's sort of myriad ways in which we can tap into through the creativity, but also through the idea of people stretching their comfort zones, people feeling uncomfortable, people approaching things in new ways. You know, I think there's a lot of things to which we are desensitized a little bit. This is particularly applicable to the environmental movement. I used to run a festival associated with the Schumacher Circle and also with you know, the Centre for Alternative Technology, looking at low carbon responses to our future. And we ran we ran a kind of artistic program alongside it as a way of kind of visualizing these things in new ways, because it does make you, the example there is about refreshing a tired rhetoric, refreshing a tired narrative to which people often switch off. And I think it gives you a new framework in which to articulate something which actually gives renewed vigor to it. You know, in terms of within an organization, we have very established work relations. It's very hierarchical. You know, we often use the example of the admin assistant standing next to the CEO or CFO or whoever, someone in the C-suite really high up, and they're helping them with their tenor part. And in that moment, there's an element of vulnerability, there's an element of the flattening of the hierarchy, and it's a kind of safe space in which we are ourselves rather than the kind of the person we are that fits within the organization. I think that in itself is an incredibly powerful way of humanizing ourselves. I could keep going thinking about, identity, I think is a really big thing. If we strip culture out of our society, what are we left with? And you could apply the same thing to an organization and to the same way that individuals relate to one another. I'm going to stop there and pass on to somebody else because I think it's
I think it's really interesting. We all know that workforces generally these days, especially larger organizations, can be pretty disparate, and team building is a major buzzword. How do we get disparate workforces back together? Now, from my personal experience, I actually do sing a bit. The ultimate team building is actually being in a choir. If you're part of 200 plus people, all with a common community venture and sort of aspiration, that is such a fantastic way of actually bringing people together. So I think arts and business can learn quite a lot from just a very simple example like that, where actually sort of bringing people together in a common purpose to do something, as you said, quite sometimes out of their comfort zone, but actually having a mutual benefits and really making quite a difference to people. Health and well-being has been another thing, which I'm sure we'll discuss. So,
yeah. I was going to say, do you feel that creativity has really, and especially after the pandemic, all being online and businesses almost seeing employees and employers in their home lives, in their out of office life as a human being? I feel personally that we've really brought a lot more humanization, as you were saying, George, into business now, and it's a lot more acceptable. So do you feel that creativity enhances that humanization in a business?
Well, I can pick up on that one. I made some notes I wanted to just, I was part of another conversation yesterday around mental health and around different responses, particularly looking at international responses to mental health and different approaches. And it, in many ways, the woman Surrey who had kind of had this big blue chip career and then had it's a similar story within mental health, that you have people who have long corporate careers and end up having their own mental health issues, and it drives them towards setting up initiatives which can help other people in a similar state. She talked about the main drivers of well-being as being to belong, to be heard, a sense of achievement, and mission and purpose. And basically, although well-being is hugely multifaceted and all these different impacts and drivers that can impact on people, when you kind of strip things all the way back and go back to a kind of basic human need, to belong, to be heard, sense of achievement, and meaning and purpose. And actually, I was reflecting before this about how applicable that same sense, that those same things are to what creativity and culture give us in terms of a feeling of belonging, in terms of a sense of that culture, and a sense of achievement. Particularly, I mean, we always try and get groups to perform. Again, it's a real stretching of the comfort zone. It's a real putting yourself out there in a way you probably have never done before, to stand on a stage. But that sense of achievement is huge, and it's incredibly fertile. That arc from like, oh my God, I cannot do this, I will not do this, to, oh my God, look what we have collectively achieved. And it could be a choir, or it could be any number of things, but that sense of like collective achievement is incredibly powerful. And then obviously meaning and purpose within an organization. If you don't have meaning and purpose, why do people work for a startup? Because they follow the vision. It's not because the money is any better, because it's probably about half the amount of money, but they follow the vision. And ultimately that's a real Gen Z way of thinking about things, that new entrants to the market, they want to see well-being, to the job market, they want to see well-being on the agenda, and they want to see creativity, and particularly a strong sense of being mission, vision focused.
Yeah. And from an international, of course. No, go ahead.
Yes, I think what George is saying, and some of the things that brought up about value propositions, and it's about people valuing themselves, and what a business is helping people understanding how to value themselves. Because in a sense, that journey, if you've been a corporate high player, but at the end of it, you're coming out with a mental health issue, something in the process as you've worked has been unholistic, has been so in one direction that yourself has not been present. The other thing about creativity, of course, is that supports people and enables people to also free up is to go and see it. Yeah, so actually businesses supporting gallery participation, going to theatre, going to concerts, or going to, if you normally go to a rock concert, going to a soul concert. If you normally go and see pop art, go and see something classical, you know, and encouraging people so that there's a natural value alignment to the business through the arts and the people who are in the business that supports people who the business serves and works towards. And I would just say the NHS choir is actually in I Have a Song. And the NHS choir is from Lambeth and Greenwich boroughs, and they're all surgeons, they're doctors, and they stand together as a choir. And they've come on board into something that is about them and their sector, and they're giving voice to that. And that gave them a whole other level, as opposed to them singing for their own events and things like that. They're now in a pop single that is about supporting their organization or their sector. And so there's working towards the roundedness of people involved is part of that whole brain, whole picture perspective as well, I put forward, yeah.
And from an international point of view, I'd be really interested to hear, because I know that everyone here has worked internationally in some form, whether it's with international clients or as you know, Matt, you're across the pond. But, you know, from an international point of view, do we feel, and this is open to the whole room, do we feel that creativity within business from an international perspective differently depending on the cultural background of where you are? Who's going to want to answer that? So, or do we feel that the pandemic, you know, as a, you know, George, a lot of your stuff's gone online now because of the pandemic. It's now got a much wider reach. Do we feel that since the pandemic and since everything's become a lot more accessible, a lot more online, that actually it's no longer really defining boundaries at all, and that it's all very much sort of working together in the same sense?
Yeah, I guess I'd share a little to that, and I think what's been discussed the last few minutes, and I think we've been very forward-looking, and I don't want what I'm saying to come across as too cynical, but there's been an opening up and the ability to access all sorts of content and stimulation is incredibly powerful. But we're also at a time where I worry culturally we're not as likely to step outside of our comfort zones in terms of the kind of culture that we have become comfortable with or we identify with as our favorite. And that's everything from the kind of echo chambers that exist with social media and the way in which we begin to define community by those who think just like us, but even in the way in which we can now curate, you know, our own art, whether or culture through, you know, I begin to think about Netflix and how often am I actually to be challenged with or likely to access a film that I might otherwise not do because the AI in Netflix knows exactly what kind of viewer I am and what I like the most. And I would, and as a former journalist, I'd also say the same thing in regards to the kind of news we consume, where when you move from a printed product, which as you go through, you are going to discover that content that you might not immediately be drawn to, but in your reading through, may spend a few minutes. Now it's just the news content that technology is informed that you like. So I think about what else is needed culturally, and is there where are those opportunities for us to seize a moment, and maybe it's, I think also, and I'll stop rambling after this, the very moment we have right now, whether it comes to, I think, an awakening we've had to mental health issues, to the way in which many, I think, have rethought or reprioritized work-life balance. The the cynic in me worries that goes away too quickly and we resort to where we were before. But the optimist in me thinks about how we begin to seize on that and lift up opportunities for a kind of resetting of culture.
Mm. I think that, Matt, just to come back on that, I think that way that we've been trying to work with organisations to answer how do we take advantage of those opportunities is massively through data. I mean, for example, there's that story, the line in A Life of Pi, isn't there, that says the sea is very cruel. It makes the smoothest of things rough and the roughest of things smooth. And I think that might have been the case, across the pandemic and people's cultural experience, in that it's made the most culturally engaged people less culturally aware or less culturally engaged, and those that were not very culturally engaged more so. And that's very evident across the arts and culture in the UK. I mean, there's that big massive data set by Indigo, which is an arts research organisation that has looked at 33,000 arts attenders across the UK. And so arts audiences in the UK are segmented into different groups, and those that are most engaged are those typically, and I say this with hesitance because nobody likes to segregate people based on typicals nowadays, but those white, affluent, middle class, highly educated people that can afford to engage in arts and culture. And those kind of like young, diverse, explorative people were less engaged in culture. And yet, because of the pandemic, those more engaged people have become less, like statistically, less engaged in arts and culture because they're less computer and IT savvy. They are more afraid of going out because they're more vulnerable to the pandemic, etc., etc. And yet we're finding that there's a 13% increase. So that those like more culturally aware people are 6% less likely now to engage in arts and culture within the next 12 months following the pandemic than they were previously. And yet you've got the kind of experienced younger people, etc., are now 13% more likely to attend and partake in arts, culture and heritage. And consequently, you've got all of these organisations across the UK that are saying, but our typical audience are X. Look at this exciting new group of people that are now 13% more likely to engage with me. What must and can I do to engage with those people? That then is that massive question, and you know that it's worth it because the data is clearly there to tell you. And then suddenly that's where you need to start having those project groups rather than the kind of departmental groups to say, okay, well, project number 1, let's get this demographic. Project number 2, let's get that group. And I think that, so consequently, going back to that Life of Pi thing, I think that that pandemic has been not cruel like the sea, but exciting like a pandemic can be, in that it can make people swish across the scale, can't it, in that way?
I think that's very exciting, actually. And I also think what the pandemic did, certain things globally, and I'll bring it up because it's there, Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, it's absolutely global. Yeah. And the globe is responding and recognizing a 500-year-old issue in the 21st century that needs to be addressed and incorporated. My presence on this platform alone, as being a singular, third woman as well on the platform, is indicative of that. So the global stories and how we understand and approach those that perhaps we haven't heard of or seen before, are they going to reflect in the different art experiences, excuse me, my video's gone, in the different art ways that are cultural, so that Eastern Europeans responded, yes, to what happened to George Floyd and Black Lives Matter with what they have as their creativity, and that becomes of global value in the space without it having to be specifically trying to be like African-American music or African-American ways. It was from their own creative, and more of that global expression now also recognizes the multicultural, inverted commas, that somewhere like London is, and says, ah, yes, it's all of value and sits together. It doesn't have to always match. It just has to their way of saying, and that we value it in and of itself. And I think that that 13% maybe reflects that as well. And I think that is part of the excitement, that I think the momentum we now as creators need to harness and drive, so that people become involved as viewers and as participants, and create the space and forums where they can do that, whether they're working or not, whether their interest in opera and concert is or not is not really the issue. That the availability and the business message to become involved, because it's relevant to them, whether it's retail on Oxford Street or whether it's banking in the city, it's all there. So yeah.
I think it's fascinating, actually, really exciting what Becky just said, and that shift, that complete shift in people's expectations, and the fact that there's this potentially new young audience, champing at the bit to interact with culture and cultural experiences. And I think, the big part of that is actually in the programming. How can programmers and how can people who are leading cultural events and, sort of driving culture forward in the arts, how can they program to try and cater for that new audience? And so I think that should be the key, really. Becky, you probably know more about that than I do, but I mean, that's
I think it's
fascinating.
So it's so very true, isn't it? I mean, how often have theatres specifically, but also concert halls or whatever, said, I'd just love our audiences to get younger. And then they put on stuff at 7:30 at night. Now, a younger audience is at 7:30. I'm there saying, I'm in my late 30s. I'm still for a theatre, a young audience member. At 7:30 at night, I'm saying, I've told you for the 4th time, please stay in bed. And yes, I will see you in a minute. Do you know what I mean? All of the arts, culture and stuff is programmed at 7:30, which is bedtime. And if you want your audiences to, you either need to program it really late when they're finally asleep, or make it on demand and make it available. And, I'm like you, when people that actually work in the creative industries, you'd think that I would be watching theatre shows all of the time. And yet I'm not, purely because they are on at 7:30. Yet in the pandemic, I watched more arts and cultural stuff and I did in the pandemic than I had for the 7 years previously, because I just knew that Friday night was Bristol Old Vic night. I could turn on at 7:30, 8 o'clock, or at 8:45, depending on how bedtime went, and I could still enjoy that program, that offer. And I think that's really exciting. And what's great for arts and cultural organisations is, because they've now got this global audience, time will tell which countries and which societies are tuning into their data more often. And then people will say, well, great, these countries or these communities or these societies have engaged with us once. What more can we do to get them to engage with us, not just once, but time and time and time again? And then we say, okay, well, we need to represent this global issue, or let's tell a story from this community in a different country, or let's tell a story from an area that we've not told before, which will then give writers and creators and music makers and producers and everything that opportunity to start telling different stories, but they're representative of people around the world, because now all of our product is and should be and should remain to be available all the way around the world. And I think that will enable audiences to get younger, because we are making it flexible for people. People don't have that 9 till 5 babysitting kind of job anymore.
Sorry, I just, there's just a little bit of a concern that arises in my head, which is all going on at home and on a screen. Yeah. And we've got young people that are walking around with tablets and phones, and that's their world. It's all here, 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 here. Are we going to lose going to theatre because we're going to watch it on a screen? Or are we going to lose going to a gallery? Where is the footfall? The Royal Academy. I'm
Because
just
in
wondering.
the same way that, in the same way that people still go to football matches and watch it on television, it's an unbeatable experience.
Okay.
And I think that it's about that messaging and that understanding, as you said, about the customer and the visitor journey, isn't it? It's about persuading people and reminding people that there is more to see in real life. So, for example, an email should have 20% of the offer, encouraging people to go to a website where there's 50% of the offer, which encourages people to go to visit in person where they can get 100% of the offer. So it's about that messaging and saying, dip your toe in, try us when you're free, when you're available, when you've got nothing else to lose, try us online. But all of that shepherding and that cultivation needs to be really active and key and targeted for the right people with the right messaging, with the right everything behind it, so that it does result in in-person visits.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree that the arts need to be accessible, and I think we've all always said as well, and perhaps this is hopefully breaking new ground with it, the arts being elitist. That's always been an argument, and it's interesting how people are dipping in and out now that they would never have accessed culture or sort of the arts. So perhaps as a result of that, we perhaps need to be putting more emphasis on local community-based projects where it is accessible, it is down the road, but putting funding into those sort of ventures more than the bigger sort of national things, and to make it really accessible for people to access culture on their doorstep and the arts on their doorstep. Perhaps that's the route forward.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, I think the way in which we can look at technology, though, as an opportunity is also to begin to upset the very ways in which what has been required in terms of being a kind of culture maker in a sense, because it's not just thinking about, as others have said here, all right, what culture is going to be attractive to a younger, more diverse audience, but rather how do we make sure those who are with the widest channels through which to engage others isn't the culture makers aren't simply white affluent, a white affluent group of people. And so what also excites me, and I'll just use one example, which is Franklin Leonard and the Blacklist in the United States, which is completely upsetting the power structure in terms of screenplays and what is adapted to Hollywood films, and especially in the shadow of a lot of reckoning that's been happening and justifiably in Hollywood but the ability, I think we all have a responsibility to be thinking about how we rethink space, and I think technology is also a key to that, so that it's not this very passive way of thinking differently about culture, but rather how we are making sure that if indeed the idea and there's clear data pointing to an opportunity even from a business sense, not just from a mission or ethically the right thing to do in terms of engaging a new generation, part of it is making sure that new generation, a younger, more diverse audience, are part of, they're not just an audience. They are also part of that, a new generation of culture makers.
Helena, can I just pick up a point?
Yeah.
So a very interesting thing that happened over the last year was, and just picking up Matt's point about engaging with different cultures, engaging with everybody in different countries and all kinds of cultures. So during the pandemic, in essentially a world of the arts, which is, much of it is kind of publicly funded, and of course my area isn't. So the creative thinking has to go into the planning and the marketing and all aspects of the business. And at the beginning of the pandemic, where all of my colleagues were saying, well, how can I generate work? How can I generate income? How can I generate profit with my work? I thought the opposite way, and I thought, how can I give? And how can I reach out and do something different that gets around the world and actually brings value to people and brings hope to people? And I created a mental health single called Can You Hear Me, which went absolutely all over the world, millions and millions of listens and views, and that was wonderful. But what it then did was generate all the data about where the audience was and where one could reach out. And that, all the profits of that went to charity. So it was a mental health, it was kind of giving to mental health in that way, because it's something I feel passionate about. But it was also spreading the arts as a force for good in a difficult time for the world. But then the data generated there showed us exactly where around the world we were getting the most engagement. And it was literally every single country. I mean, the Apple Music stats were incredible all over the pod. Very, very lucky. And, you know, we're very lucky to have that data. Then I looked at this incredible new platform called TikTok. Now, this is an example of where, Matt's smiling, it's an example of where the younger generation, the Generation Z and all the rest of it, are creators in an everyday capacity, right? They are taking existing music tracks and then creating their own music. So this was my strategy then, and this was all completely unpaid, but it's generated massive dividends, not just in profit, but in kind of reaching out to new audiences and kind of spreading the arts around in a time where the arts is really, you know, challenged. So I created a comedy track that was deliberately written to be a viral, a bit like Crazy Frog. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's called Funny Song Cavendish. Funny Song Cavendish. If you look on TikTok, it's had about 280 million streams, so like way more than the population of the USA, which is incredible, including all these celebrities like Jason Derulo, blah, 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 have done funny videos to it. Now, the thing about it is that it's reached every single culture, and my personal, you know, satisfaction is looking on there and seeing how, you know, people in Israel are tweeting about it, are doing videos to cheer themselves up, you know, people in Africa. It's absolutely incredible, because that it should be like, it shouldn't be just white middle-class people. You know, I'm afraid I'm one, but I didn't choose to be one. Do you know what I mean? I think everybody should have the opportunity to be creative, and the point is everybody is creative, and also to think creatively and to sometimes give, not just take. That was just what I wanted to say.
No, I really love that. I think that's amazing. And that leads really nicely on. I'd love to hear from everyone, and I'll kind of go around the room on this one. If you could all kind of share with us the role and impact the arts has had in your professional and personal life. So Neil, you're up first on my screen. But yeah.
Well, obviously I inhabit the creative world. I sort of work with sort of creative people, you know, I sort of collaborate with creative people, and I sort of deliver creative projects to businesses. So I work in those two worlds really. But from a personal point, I mean, I'd sort of, you know, I as I said, as I sing, I play instruments, I sort of engage in music. Music to me is a great sort of, just even listen to music, it's a great sort of stress buster, you know, it's a part of community, it's sort of a sense of involvement. So I suppose it depends how you tap into all these different things really. And I just feel for people who haven't either had the chance or ever seen you know, had the opportunity to access just simple things in life that can actually have a real benefit, that, you know, are free and just, you know, but so I don't know if that really answers your question, but sort of but yeah, that's from a personal point of view. Yeah, music and singing and sort of playing, but in a business sense, I suppose it's just building collaborative thinking and working with different people, pushing the boundaries as to what can be done, and just going into things with an open eye, really, an open attitude, and not being sort of pigeonholed or sort of, you know, you know, sort of go with a fresh view really. And I think that's one thing that's come out of the pandemic. People are very much open to different ideas and different ways of thinking, so that's hopefully good for the future, sort of for the arts and culture sort of sectors.
Yeah, amazing. Matt?
Yeah, and and it's a perfect perfect segue, because I think about my experience professionally at Chautauqua Institution, and this, so coming from a brief time as a journalist and one of my primary responsibilities is curating a lecture series through 9 weeks of the summer. But and thinking about, you know, thematically, what do we want to spend a weekend conversation on, whether it's issues of the Middle East or issues about empathy or resilience or whatever else, you know, climate change, whatever else it may be. I think, and I've been at this organization for about 15 years, and I think that what is been most eye-opening for me, even as someone who's responsible for that lecture series, and perhaps the most obvious way in which to quote unquote wrestle with difficult issues, is it's in fact the lecture series I'm responsible for that is most met with resistance when there are ideas that are different than one's own. And yet I see from the work of my colleagues in the literary arts, in opera, in theater, in visual arts, the opening, back to Neil's point, the opening that happens of one to be challenged, to have one's assumptions be challenged, and what can happen from that then in conversation and community. So it doesn't make me think any less of my work. I think of my work as one of several sparks to conversation, but just to see firsthand the way in which people let down some of their defenses in engaging with the arts, and the kind of impact that can have then from leaving that space, returning to home communities, and as leaders in those communities, what that can mean. That's had a profound impact on me.
Amazing, amazing. And Becky, what about yourself in terms of business and personal?
So previously, I've always answered the question of what does arts and culture mean to you professionally with the answer, without it, I would be unemployed. I'm qualified for nothing else. However, to all of those corporate business people that are watching this, that is completely not true, because to be an arts and cultural and heritage and creative person, you have a massive wealth of transferable skills. So for example, you don't have to be, oh, you're the creative one. There's writing, there's press, there's PR, there's data analytics, there's human resources, there's program, there's project development. All of those things I could do if the arts and cultural sector didn't exist. However, I've chosen not to go into those disciplines because the arts and heritage, the arts and cultural sector has the opportunity to enable people to understand the world better and to understand people better. And that makes me happy. So although I could maintain employment, I'm so glad that without it, I'm happy in my work. So professionally, I'm happy in my work, and I have a massive sense of value because I'm helping the world understand each other better through arts and culture, because it gives you a window into somebody else's life, which is desperately important. Yeah. And personally, without it, I would be lost. I mean, how often is it that when a friend, for example, goes through a bit of a blip or has a challenge, you say, oh, let's do a hobby together, let's go dancing together, let's, if somebody has a miscarriage, here's a colouring book, just sit and colour for a week, here's a blank notebook, just sit and write your thoughts down. All of those things are creativity. Let's do a potting course together, let's get the paint out, let's do sand art, let's splash around in water. All of those things are creative things. All of those things are a release of expression, and all of those things fall within the arts, creative, cultural sector. And without it, I personally don't think I'm the only one that would be personally lost without that form of self-expression.
Yeah, and George, what about you?
Nothing else.
Well, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have been surrounded by music my whole life. I was just thinking, I grew up with the story that my music comes down my mother's side. My mother's grandfather was the ship's musician on the Discovery on Scott's first mission to the Antarctic. So he'd be the one playing them on the concertina on the squeeze box that my mum still plays, believe it or not. And the reflection of that. So they arrive at the end of the summer and they get iced in for the winter, and it's dark all winter. So then you think, wow, what role did that injection of artistic input, creativity give to that group of people? And I think, so then reflecting that and maybe slightly tenuously linking it to my role now, where I'm here in an office on my own most of the time, but I'm enabling people to take part. I've got I know similar to Thomas, I've got a 1-year-old daughter. I don't have as much time to be creating, getting out. Obviously, we haven't been getting out and gigging much this year, but we have been enabling a lot. We've been enabling people to experience music, and I think especially through this difficult last 18 months, it has been something which I've taken a lot of solace in, even the fact that I'm not necessarily the one directly doing the imparting. We were supported, the powers that be, Oliver Twist, the benevolence of the DCMS and the Arts Council. We have received a couple of Cultural Recovery Fund grants, and a big part of that was the enabling of cultural opportunity. And so that has been a big driver that I've really that has, you know, pushed me to come to work and sat in an office. I'm very much someone who thrives off interaction, of being out there connecting with people. But to know that our activity is bringing connection through culture and artistic connection to other people. And something I would like to touch on a bit further on, and I'll stop here, but is just we're at the cusp of that reintegration to offices. We talked a little bit about Gen Zers, talked a little bit about what it means to be creative. How many people are at their most dynamically creative in a Zoom square? Imagine if you're 21, you've just graduated, you've got your first job. Are you at your most? Are you feeling that you're connecting with people in your work in the way that enables you to bring what you think is to be your creative self to work? Don't know, but it's something that organizations should be thinking about in terms of how they plan the return, the reintegration. I think it's a big thing to be aware of.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And Kashinawa, what about you with business and personal?
Yes, I think the key link between business and personal, I'm in the space of being a cultural facilitator. I do projects, and then I'm an artist of a classical art form. And the key word between the two is about retrieval, retrieval of histories. And the other key word is intervention with something that doesn't look like an intervention. So if I start, for example, with the work that we do at Nubian Jack with blue plaques, for example, about 15 or more years ago, cultural English heritage, 1.6% was probably the most that they'd reached in terms of non-English people, if you like, in their blue plaque scheme. And along comes Nubian Jack, and we did the Bob Marley plaque, and they said, look, we don't do this, you do. And so Jack Bueller created Nubian Jack and has done 61 plaques since, and has raised the level to now having 7% of that. And what those blue plaques on the street, so they're an aesthetic on the street that tells a story of a place, of someone, or a happening that has taken place, that is informative directly. It gives the year, it gives who, and it tells a story that no school is telling, and neither is there any art form really telling that. It's the one place that you're going to find out about Sidney Bechet, that you're going to see Marcus Garvey, or where Haile Selassie lived, and so on, in your area, next door to your retail shop or your park or somewhere else. That someone like Ethel Scott was actually the first woman to win a medal at the Olympics, that, you know, George Bridgewater played for, you know, Henry VIII, that Fanny Eaton is actually the face behind the Pre-Raphaelite movement, you know. So these are really cultural interventions of realization. So, and that has led to a whole global marketing agency taking on the Plaque Forum with Black Plaques, the Black Plaques project, that is there in a greater way and telling the story. So it begins with a black plaque, and which is temporary, and finishes with a blue plaque, which is permanent. So there's a journey that the population can go on. For me personally, my art form is a retrieval as well, in that I am holding a heritage that flows through me, through my cell, if you like, this my cellular self, generational, that is my culture, that is about how art is and the aesthetic on walls, on where people live. And so the esoteric nature of that and what that means in in the village, if you like, and the presence of that, and understanding what that means without it being so-called religious or just indeed spiritual, which it obviously also is, and how that now has to sit in this place, and that it flows through me, and what my journey is to bring that to the fore, very particularly for my own culture, the young people in my own culture, to appreciate that from themselves, because you have to bear in mind that we have been blocked in that way. So we have a whole journey about telling the story of our own contribution and where it has arrived in this world. And then with the African Tales, that is about the history from elders, and that people engagement, young people talking to elders who, in a sense, in our community, and I think it's really across the board, I've done a lot of work with older people, and without it being just African or Caribbean, is their presence and their story gets put into a home somewhere, you know, and we don't necessarily understand how they met the challenges, if you like. And their biographies don't have to be a great book in a library. It's also by speaking and telling how they met challenges from the 50s, 60s, 70s in their workplace, being unemployed as women, as getting older as men, and the young generation coming in and they've lost their job. The whole generation of men that suddenly, you know, the 80s was all about something and they lost their jobs and they were only 40 something or 50. Where are they now? So that retrieval of experience, I think, meets both where I work and what I bring to the table for the population, and for myself, it's about carrying that legacy and making sure that I take responsibility for the legacy that is in my personal self. Yeah.
I love that. Amazing. And Thomas, what about you in terms of business and personal?
Well, as Kashmir just said, I think connecting culturally with other countries and cultures, and learning from them, respecting them, and, you know, allowing them to have more space than, you know, the British awful history of Britain's given them, while kind of, you know, everybody learning from each other and connecting in a very human way. I think it's obviously a gateway to the psyche. The arts, you know, life and death, it's the most important thing that we've got, and it says things that words can't, and connects. Obviously, historically, we can find out, you know, the good and bad stuff that's gone in the past, but we can connect with it in a very direct way. On a personal level, I met my wife through the arts, so I'm very grateful to the arts for that, but that's just a personal thing.
I love that. And unfortunately, even though we are all creatives and we're very, very good at what we do in terms of being creative, we cannot create more time. But I know that was smooth, right? That was really smooth. But I've been thinking of that for the last 2 minutes, not gonna lie. But one thing that I'd really, really love to know is, I'm actually very, very passionate. My background's kind of quite a lot in kids entertainment and that sort of world. I truly believe that, I know we've touched a little bit on it with this kind of the now generation, the generation of young children, and schools and things are very much cutting out the arts, and the funding for the arts are going, and creativity. And I personally believe that there's a lot of creativity and imagination that's being lost in children, and the freedom to play is almost being taken away from them. It's being you know, put in front of a screen instead, which is then, yes, although it's still creative and it's still using their imagination, it's almost spoon feeding it to them. It's giving them it. A really great example is my godson was 4, and I said to him, I went over, I said, oh, let's play pirates, and he said, oh, but we can't. And I said, why? And he said, well, we don't have a pirate ship. And I said, yeah, we do. It's just over here. And he went, no, it's not there. And I said, oh, okay, well, look, we're a pirate. And he said, well, you don't have an outfit. And I said, well, we can pretend. He goes, no, it's not there. And that really kind of quite shocked me. He comes from a very creative background. His mum's a singer. You know, all of his role models in his life are very creative. So for a child in a very creative family to be thinking like that really shocked me. So what are our thoughts, and this is open to the room, in terms of creativity being squashed almost, to put quite a dramatic term on it, being squashed in younger children, and how will that affect businesses in 15, 20, 30 years time?
I think, isn't it funny how much investment the government are putting on healthy eating schemes for young children to prevent obesity and lack of physical health? Is creativity in children not gym membership for the mind?
Yeah, totally agree.
I think it's also how we show up and how we let young people show up for us. So I love that you were asking those questions, but we all need to be willing to be goofy and creative and let out our inner child. But I'd also say we're going to find ways in which young people show up with their creativity that may not be something that comes naturally to us. And while I am someone who work depends on the way in which we show up in a very physical way and be present with one another, let's not forget that there are other incredible ways that we shouldn't immediately dismiss, whether it be through video game, and certain, and what I mean by that is not that which has been built for them, but the ways in which young people can be creative using new technology. So that's what I'd say.
We shouldn't necessarily miss these new technologies. It's very easy as a parent to just think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to let my child go near a screen.
I say that as a parent of a 10-year-old who is reckoning with video game time right now, and yet he showed me a movie he made with a couple other people using that video game platform that was incredibly creative. And
Sure. And my other reflection was just going to be, my wife is a visual artist. She's a painter, and it was actually one of her shows where I happened to be standing next to this chap and introduced myself and told him a bit about what I do with On Song. And he turned and he said, "That's very interesting. I happen to be the artistic director of the Royal College of Music." Oh, you're kidding me. Anyway, he sort of took a shine a little bit, or maybe he took pity, but whatever. He invited me and my business partner in, and we came in and had a chat. And he gave me a perspective on what we do, which is just so other to how I imagined it. And he was saying, he said, "Oh, well, I can imagine you work in sectors like, high stress, but also fairly highly educated, tech, finance, legal particularly." And he said, "Well, what you're doing is vital because in an age of without getting too political, in an age of Tory cuts on arts and culture for young people, you are going out and inspiring parents who are then going to go home and inspire their kids with music. And those kids are the ones who are then going to come up back through us, through the Royal College." And that kind of generational vision was not something I'd seen before. And I thought it was very, it was a very sort of long-term way of thinking. And it is just that. We are all absolutely tasked with creating that level of awe and play and not seeing creativity as just something which just is innate. And
can I just add to that, Helena? Sorry.
Go on, Thomas.
Sorry, I'm just going to add a little bit to a point. So I gave my nephew a book and he swiped it like an iPad, and it was a real, wake-up call. But I think in a world that AI is reaching, I think creativity is the only thing that's going to save us from sort of computer takeover. I think we're going to have to think creatively because the computers can do everything else, or they will be able to,
Totally.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. I think it's a case of finding the right balance between, yes, we all know, technology has a role to play in moving forward, and you can be, as Matt said, really creative in using technology. But wouldn't it be nice if we could actually just throw it away as well and just give kids a big piece of paper and a pencil and just, sort of just let their minds run wild? And I know that's a bit of a cliche sort of thing, but I think it's this case of just finding the right balance to actually use technology where it's needed, but at the same time, it's not the be-all and end-all, and actually just give them the space and the freedom to actually let their imaginations run wild and sort of, and become pirates.
Yeah, exactly.
And Helena, you asked your question and you specifically said, what does this mean for children and in 15, 20 years time, their role in business? And I'd just like to pick up on that specific joining between children and business, because if all children now are being funneled into this STEM, like English and maths kind of thing, every child is going to come out the same. And therefore every business will come out the same, because every ingredient has been exactly the same. And I think it will be the children who have got parents and families, etc., who permit their child to explore their creativity at home and then proactively encourage it away from home and away from school, being like art club, in the most ridiculous example, but art club or dance or whatever, that extracurricular thing. It will be those children that stand unique, which will then become the most desirable in 15, 20 years time, where they're going through the interviews, because they'll be the only one that can do something different. And problem solve, as George said right in the very, very start of the session.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
I just want to add a bit about a lot of what we're saying is about engagement with tools and various things. And the most natural is what's going on outside. If we're going to take care of the world and nature and the trees and water and the sea and everything, the children have to see what it's like and have their feet in the water. That's what they love best, splashing around. And as Neil was saying, give them the tools, but instead of having the boxes, empty boxes at home, take it to the park, and let them play with empty boxes in the park where other children can join in as well.
Yes.
And then you've got a different relating, because if everybody is STEM, it does mean that it will develop fantastically clarity and focus in around what they're doing, but then they have to go outside of that and be in the world with, the survival of the planet. And I think that message has to, and being locked away for 18 months, there's a real opportunity where everybody's out and the weather is supporting us right now, to be out and play out, and I think that that's very exciting too. Yeah.
I think that's a lovely message to end on, especially as, I was just thinking, especially with Thomas and George, your children, your little 1-year-olds have never known anything but the pandemic. They don't know any different. And it's sort of a crazy thing to think of, that it's lasted this long. But thank you so much to everyone for being here today. And I just want to quickly whiz around the room for anyone that's desperate to kind of keep in touch with you that are watching now. How best is it to keep in touch and follow you and get in touch and all of that malarkey? So Neil, how is it best to keep in touch?
Oh, I'm gonna point to my sort of background here. I was on social media. Look at my website or give me a call. I mean, it's good to talk to people, isn't it? I really enjoy speaking to people and just finding out more about what they're doing and and hopefully meeting people. But sort of all the normal channels behind you. So,
fantastic.
If anyone want to have a conversation, happy to talk.
Fab, thank you, Neil. And Matt, how's best to get in touch with you?
Social media, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and I'll just give a shout out to organization I work for, Chautauqua Institution. You can find us at chq.org. But I love to engage others in conversation. This has been really wonderful conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Fab. I'm Becky.
Quite simply, Becky, BECKIE.smith@flyinggeese.co.uk, or just Google me and fingers crossed I'll be up there.
Fab. George, how can we keep tabs on what you're doing?
Well, if you Google me, you'll find out that I am apparently the tallest man in America.
Oh.
Fun fact.
As we all start Googling George Fallon.
He's a doppelganger who doesn't look much like me. onsong.co.uk. onsong.co.uk. That's where we are in the world these days, sadly.
Fabulous. And Kashinua?
Yes, my website is lovehalo.co.uk. Love, all one word, .co.uk.
Oh, I think we lost you just then. Can you repeat it just one more time? You cut out just as you were saying the vital bit of information.
Classic. It's Love Halo, Halo, lovehalo.co.uk. That's my website.
Perfect. We got that. And Thomas, how about yourself?
I have a friend who's got the same name as a very famous porn star, and they had to change their name because everybody Googled. If you just Google Thomas Hewitt Jones, you'll see some of my mad projects. Thomas Hewitt Jones or thomashewittjones.com, and do reach out. It'd be lovely to hear from anyone. Really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you, everybody. Very interesting
Fabulous.
stuff.
And if anyone wants to keep tabs on what I'm doing, just visit my website. It's helenamitchell.com, and you've got all the social links on there. Most active on Instagram. I have to be honest, it's my favorite platform. I love it. But no, thank you so much for all of you being here and taking the time out of your day to discuss this. It's been wonderful, mind-boggling, and yeah, I hope that everyone watching this, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching it later on in the future, you've gained a lot from this and have a lot of questions, and by all means, if you have specific questions for anyone here, I'm sure I can speak for everyone, please do just reach out to us and keep the conversation going is all I can say. So thank you so much, everyone.